David Fincher is one of the top working directors today, and he's got a brand new thriller that has dropped on Netflix. So today I'm going to stop and rank every David Fincher film from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all the David Fincher films. My list is not the right list. It's just my list, and I would love to see yours. And let's get started. Coming in last place, Alien 3. Now, if you are familiar with my channel at all, you have probably heard me say Alien 3 is the movie that I hate the most. This is my least favorite movie of all time. Now, to be perfectly clear, it's not the worst movie of all time. Honestly, it's not even the least watchable movie or anything like that. There's a lot of things about this film that are superficially entertaining. It's a genre that I enjoy. Ripley is one of my favorite movie characters of all time, and Sigourney Weaver is fantastic at playing Ripley in this movie. David Fincher is an incredible director, and even when directing this particular bad movie, he still has a great eye, so there's no shortage of fantastic looking shots in this movie, but it's not a good movie. They went into production without a completed script. David Fincher shot the full script they gave him. They started editing the movie, and then they wrote the rest of the film, went back, did reshoots to complete the movie. At some point in time, they locked David Fincher out of the editing room and just kind of took over from him. And on the documentaries, on the official Blu-ray and DVDs for the movie, they admitted, our primary goal was to hit a release date. We hired David Fincher to shoot the film, not to make a great film. We just needed someone to hit our release date. We weren't trying to make the best movie possible. And we didn't know that we had David Fincher. We just thought we were hiring a guy that could shoot the script that we had at that point in time. But none of that is why I hate this movie. It's because I think this is one of the worst examples of audience betrayal in cinematic history. And what do I mean by that? Aliens is one of my favorite movies of all time. The entire objective of the last third of that movie is Ripley trying to save Newt. When she does it, it's so satisfying. And as you go into the final scene, Newt asks if she can finally sleep. Will the nightmares be gone? And Ripley assures her she can. She's safe. The nightmare's over. Now you can sleep. She goes to bed, and the producers of Alien 3 thought, you know what? What if we just killed Newt off right off the bat? Right as Alien 3 starts, let's just kill her off.
Not a great plan.
I just think that is such an unbelievably horrible decision, betrayal of the audience, betrayal of the franchise, and I just can't forgive the movie for that choice. And I will never be able to forgive this movie for that horrendous choice. I'm not alone. James Cameron has said that this movie is a slap in the face to his film, and David Fincher has said no one hates Alien 3 more than him. I don't blame him for this movie being bad. He didn't actually have control. If he'd been able to make his own movie, I'm sure it would have been great. Number 11, Mank. I think this is a classic example of a film which I respect so much more than I enjoy. I think that David Fincher delivered the film that he wanted to make. He made the movie that the intended audience wants it to be, but I am not the intended audience. I found it to be dull and fairly alienating while being technically very well made. Mank is a movie that is about the creation of Citizen Kane, sort of essentially made in the style of Citizen Kane, which is an interesting thing to do. He does a perfect recreation of 1940s Hollywood as well as 40s Hollywood filmmaking. So it feels like a product of the past while tackling the past. It has that old tit for tat style of dialogue, the way that it's written and the cadence under which it's delivered. The banter is sharp, but also for that same reason, it feels distant, like I'm watching a relic of the past. That if I was specifically into that, it would be awesome. But also for me, it was like, oh, that's kind of cool on a novelty level, not something I specifically connected with. It also feels like a film that's intentionally inaccessible to anyone that's not into golden age Hollywood, as well as the politics of that era. If you're not a film history buff, I just don't know what you would get out of this film. And if you're new to being a film buff, but not particularly knowledgeable, like you want to learn more, I don't think that this movie is a particularly good on-ramp. It's not even for people that want to get into this. It's for people that are already into this material, that already kind of know the story. Every scene feels like it assumes the audience has a certain working knowledge of the time period, of the politics, of the names, everything. It assumes you know it. It doesn't bring you into the world. So if you're not already part of the club, it's fairly inaccessible. So a film that it's technically perfect. It does a recreation. It does exactly what it's trying to do. These performances are amazing at what they are going for. But I have no idea who I would recommend this film to outside of film Twitter. Number 10, The Game, to give a little bit of point of reference where we are in the realm of how I would review these films. With the movie Mank, it's the sort of film that I would give a positive letter grade because I think it's technically well made, but then I would give it a negative score on my numbers because I personally don't entertain it. When you get to The Game, this is a movie that I would go mixed positive. Like I would recommend this film, but it would be with reservations. It's not fantastic, but I think it's a movie worth watching. It's a more traditional genre fare for David Fincher, where essentially it's this thriller about a man who feels like he's in control of his life and then finds himself wrapped up in this game where he has no control and loses control of his life and has to deal with the fact that he no longer is in control. It's great at building intrigue and having all of these little mysteries and making you guess, like, what is going on here? Who is behind this? Who is involved with it? How are they involved? What exactly is going on? And it's a lot of fun all the way up until the final answer that has always felt like a cop-out to me, where the whole movie feels like it's building the case for one finale, and then it pulls the rug out from underneath you and it reveals it's something else entirely. And it's a twist that's just too improbable. It feels like a cheat. It doesn't feel consistent. It doesn't feel like they're playing fair, where you go, wait a minute. How many things have to go exactly right for this to work? If this person does this, if this person does, it doesn't work. And it's a sort of ending that just, it ends on such a frustrating note that kind of dominates my thoughts on it. But every time I rewatch it, I enjoy the film. I have positive memories of the experience. It's just, I wish they'd either constructed the movie as a whole differently or found a better finale that was more satisfying. Like, there's parts in this movie where people are like firing machine guns and stuff's exploding, and then you get to the end of it and you go, I just don't know how you could possibly explain that. The whole thing is dependent on the precise place a person steps off of something. There's no way to explain that, and that just cheapens the whole experience. It's so great at building intrigue. It's thrilling. Performances are great. It's an entertaining film. I wish it worked in the end, though. Number 9, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And curious is a nice way to describe this film. It is a truly unique cinematic experience while also being kind of reminiscent of Forrest Gump as well as The Notebook. Our basic premise is about a boy who's born as an old man, and as he ages, his body grows younger. And inherently, that's a fascinating concept, which provides all these unique opportunities to see life taking place from a reverse perspective. Now, it takes a little while to get going. You know, when he's young and doesn't have a lot of freedom as his old man child, I didn't really connect with all that well. And then once he gets old enough that he can go off on his own and have volition, it just kind of hooks you as you're experiencing life in such a different way that's something unique. We haven't seen this before, and that's what you want movies to do. That's where it gets frustrating, though, because at the same time, I don't know that I like the character choices a lot of the time, where the story is so captivating and hooks you with this great premise, and then the characters make choices that make them tough to root for or tough for you to care what even happens to them. So it's just a real mixed bag in curious ways, where it's a unique premise that's also kind of familiar. And the premise just hooks you and sucks you in, but the characters kind of push you away. Make of that what you will. Number 8, The Killer. And once again, to give you a point of reference, I really liked this movie. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I got what I wanted out of this film. That's what's so great about great directors. They have a filmography in the entire top 2/3 of their list, their films. They're all great. They're all movies that I thoroughly enjoy, recommend, and offer something different and unique. And in the case of this movie, what I dug about it is that on a plot level, it's real straightforward, but what it does is it just puts you right there in the head and the life of this killer. It has this voice element to it that was reminiscent of American Psycho, tonally very different, totally different type of character, but you're seeing how he navigates the world, how he analyzes the world, but is kind of detached from it. But it just was reminiscent there, and you just kind of go through this whole film seeing how he works, what he values, what his code is, and how when his values and code come in contrast, how he responds to all of that. There's all these great scenarios where he buys something and you're like, what is he going to do with that? And it just does a great job of layering the conflicts and the payoffs through the different chapters in the film, where every 20 minutes you have this explosion, this payoff that resolves one layer of intrigue, one conflict, but sets up the next one. And it keeps that going with payoff, crescendo, payoff, crescendo, and it keeps building up, but maintaining the tension throughout the entire film. So I thoroughly enjoyed this one. It doesn't have the complexity, the layers as some of the top films on this list that I think just delivered more thorough of an experience, but it did what it was trying to do very well. Really liked it. Number 7, Panic Room. And this is a great example of how a world-class director can elevate what on paper looks like a basic genre film. If you just read the premise for this film, it reads like any number of other thrillers that are close quarters films about someone trying to survive. But it does everything right with the premise. Our villains are different enough to be interesting. So while our lead character is locked in a single location for much of the film, they have conflict amongst them, the villains, that keeps the story interesting. There's a villain that you're kind of rooting for. There's one that's not supposed to be there. There's the one that seems a little bit clueless. And it just adds enough tension and dynamics to a story that's very tight and very small to keep it interesting. It gets to the point quickly, and it keeps changing the dynamics. Every few minutes, something new is entered into the mix that shifts things just a little bit, moves characters around, adds someone in, takes someone out, shuffles who's where, that keeps you engaged for the full runtime of the film, despite only being in this one location. It's far from the most complex or ambitious film on this list, but it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It delivers thrills, interesting characters, and a satisfying conclusion. Number 6, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, a movie with a whole lot of layers and even more rabbit trails, but it's a movie where you actually want to go down the rabbit trails. Our two lead characters are just so broken, so complex, and the set of circumstances that have led them to the events of our film make them people that we want to explore. They're interesting, so whatever they do is interesting. So whether we're on the main quest, whether they're on their own side quests, or whether their stories are merging together, we're fascinated because they are fascinating. The whole movie has a series of twists and turns that are actually unexpected, but still satisfying. It's one of those stories where you feel like the writer is actually smarter than me. I don't feel like I could have come up with something better. You delivered the experience, the payoff that I wanted without me being able to expect what was coming. Another nice detail here, fantastic opening credit sequence that you watch the movie and you're like, wow, what just happened? I'm not normally wowed by credit sequences, and it was actually done by Tim Miller, the guy that went on to direct Deadpool, and this is one of the things that like really put him on the map, an opening credit sequence. Likewise, it is a long movie, but it moves very quick, and it keeps you hooked, and you're like, oh, wow, we just went through a very long runtime. There are a few too many endings. One of the problems with having a lot of rabbit trails and a very layered plot is then you have a lot of threads that you have to tie up at the end. And you do kind of feel that as the movie's wrapping up. It continues to wrap up for a while. But besides that, it's one of these movies that just does everything right. Great characters, story you're invested in, and a top-tier storyteller bringing the story to life. 5, Zodiac, the sprawling story of the real investigation into the Zodiac killer. And because the real life events are so fascinating, the movie itself is incredibly intriguing as it tries to tackle all of these different angles about these real life events that remain unsolved. And what it does so well is show you the hopelessness of police investigations. It tackles all these ways that there's only so much that the police can do. All of the ways that the system, the rules, stop investigations from being able to move forward. And you're watching it, a movie about events that took place decades ago, frustrated like, why can't you just talk to each other? Why can't you just share information? What are you talking about protocol? There's a killer out there. We got to figure this thing out. And it gets you to care about something that's real, despite it having happened decades ago. Likewise, on a character level, it goes into the obsession that can drive people in the ways that our work, these unresolved mysteries, can just take over our life and drive us to such extreme places. And then just on the Zodiac level of kind of the true crime, what really happened, it just piques your curiosity and it keeps pointing you in different directions, in different potential answers. And it's the sort of movie that makes you immediately want to go and research the topic. How much of this was real? What are the real arguments for each of these different people? And of course, there's a top-notch cast delivering great performances. And it's just kind of fun when you watch one of these movies from 15 years back and you go, oh, all of those guys ended up in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That's kind of funny. I love watching movies from like 20 years ago and you realize just how many people from the past all ended up in a Marvel or a DC or a Star Wars film. I would say the second half of the film is stronger than the first half. The first half of the film felt a little bit more like it was trying to show you all of the events rather than tell you a story. And in the second half, where it zeroes in on a character and his obsession, the storytelling really takes over rather than telling you all the facts that you need to know. But just a really compelling story about something I didn't actually know a ton about, and it made me want to learn more. Number 4, Gone Girl, and this is just a top-tier thriller where David Fincher adapts a book. And it is just such an entertaining, intriguing, and surprising film from beginning to end. I was lucky enough to be able to go into the film without really knowing anything, but watching it with my wife, who had read the book and knew exactly when certain things were going to happen that would get a big reaction from me. So there are all these times throughout the movie, I'm watching it and I go, oh, and then I look over and she's just got the biggest grin on her face as I'm shocked by everything going on in this film. Right off the bat, this movie has one of the best uses of an unreliable narrator that I can recall, where the entire first 40% of this movie presents you with a series of facts that you think are informing you about their relationship and telling you things that the plot can't tell you, but the director's telling the audience, and you believe all of it until you hit a point in time and you realize everything that you have just been told is actually what the character, not the director, what the character is trying to tell the detectives, and thus how the director is also trying to deceive me as an audience member. And it works so well. The movie constantly presents facts and narratives and then gives you new information that causes you to reinterpret everything that you just heard, everything that you thought you knew, and see it in a whole new perspective, but in a way that feels earned, in a way that you're like, that was smart. That was a great twist. And it's a movie where the big twist is in the middle of the film. It's an unusual structure, but it still manages to keep its momentum and its tension and its thrills all the way up until the end. It does its biggest thing, and you still have 55% of the movie left, but you don't feel disappointed. It doesn't feel like, oh, now we're on the other side. What are we going to do now? It knows what to do afterwards to surprise you and then play it out, and you're still like, oh. Another nice detail here, just has really snappy dialogue that doesn't feel scripted. It feels like people talking. Just like a little example, there's a scene where they're grilling Affleck about how he doesn't know his wife's blood type, and you're like, do people even really know that? And then he leaves the room and the detectives are like, does anyone know their wife's blood type? It just felt earned. It was funny, but it felt earned, and it was funny in a way that doesn't undermine the dark subject matter, doesn't undermine the tension. It feels organic, like people in the middle of this situation. And just in general, it tells you this captivating, larger-than-life story, but also shows you all the different ways that people deal with tension, trauma, public spectacle, and you see all of these events from different perspectives. The news coverage, the in-laws, each of the two people in this incredibly toxic relationship, the police, friends, and it plays it all out, and it's entertaining, it's interesting. Final 10 minutes feel rushed, like they didn't exactly know how to land it, and so it feels dramatically like the right thing. You have these two really kind of awful people. Nobody really gets away with it because they're stuck with each other. But it doesn't, it just feels a little bit like we have to do something to close it out rather than the most satisfying possible conclusion. But otherwise, I mean, this is just a great film. Real quick before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all of David Fincher's films. Also, if you like this type of content, I have done a ton of these rankings. Martin Scorsese films, Spielberg, Nolan, and many, many, many more. If you like director rankings, you can check out more in this playlist right over here when this video is done. In third place, Fight Club, a movie that's not the easiest to put in a simple box because there's so much in the film and it has been interpreted so many different ways by different people. Some of them good, some of them bad, some of them healthy, some of them unhealthy. Some people living out what the movie is kind of satirizing and other people getting a lot out of it. It's a movie that just captures the angst and lack of purpose and disillusionment that so many young men, or really men in general, face. And in particular, it captures the version of it right around the turn of the century in a way that heavily resonated with people that were coming of age at that time period, which was me and all of my friends. So right after this movie came out, a bunch of us discovered it. We didn't fully understand it at the time, but it just tapped into something special that resonated on our emotional wavelength. So many of my friends ran out and bought the book as well as all of Chuck Palahniuk's other books and just dove into them because it captured something that was true then, and I think kind of remains true to this day, where there is a certain crisis of masculinity where we know the toxic version of it and we know the bad signs of it, but we don't know what it should be, how to channel a certain energy. And so society knows how to tear it down, but not tell men what to be, what it's supposed to look like. And there's just an angst and confusion that comes with that. And it goes back a long time. And even as the movie really starts to touch on this idea of, as the family breaks down, as more and more marriages ended in divorce, you start to have a first generation of men that were raised by women. And all of that has consequences, and the movie kind of plays that out. It's satire, it's commentary, it's funny, it has fights, it has explosions, it has cool visuals, but really at its core, it's about a certain brokenness in society as well as in men. And it's an idea that movies are still tackling. In its own way, Barbie tackles this same idea through Ken, and whether he's Ken enough, he has his own existential crisis. It has its own way in which it has this hyperbolized caricature of masculinity, which you also see in Fight Club. And so there's something very powerful about all that it's trying to do here. It's another film with a fantastic use of an unreliable narrator, but once again, in a totally different way, where as you're watching it, it makes sense. It plays right, and it keeps reframing scenes. It keeps tricking you. Every time a scene might give the audience a hint as to what's really going on, it then goes out a little bit longer, introduces Tyler into the mix that causes you to rethink it, and it diverts your attention. It's like a magic trick that it just knows all the ways to get you to look where it wants you to look rather than to see the trick that's being played right in front of you. And earlier David Fincher films had a visual flair. He's always had a great eye. He's always had a distinct style. This kind of cranks it up to this other level due to the nature of the subject matter, the storytelling, the satire, the comedy, the nature of it. He gets to just crank that up to this whole other level and show what he's capable of. So this is one of these movies that really was a formative film for me, of watching a movie that tapped into something I was dealing with right as I'm like coming of my own, trying to discover who I am and getting into movies that aren't just big blockbusters, movies that tackle ideas, maybe ideas that I really did not understand fully at the time. That's when this movie came out. And so in a lot of ways, it has a special place in my heart.
The first rule of Fight Club is you do not talk about Fight Club.
Our runner-up, Seven. And this is another example of a film that on paper, it sounds like many other films. It almost sounds like a generic police procedural about the guy about to retire is paired up with the new guy who's kind of arrogant, trying to track down the serial killer. That's not new. That's not fresh. That is not worthy of number 2 on a list like this. But what the movie does so well is do the best version of that, where everything has more meaning and weight. Everything is thematically rich. It's gorgeous is the opposite, really, of the word you should use to describe it. It's just immaculately shot of these deeply dark and disturbing images. It's the sort of film that sticks with you. You watch Seven once and you remember these victims. You don't even see them getting killed, but you remember them because they're just such unsettling ideas.
Have you ever seen anything like this? No.
Even over the last month where I've been trying to watch through these movies, I had someone over and I was like, hey, want to watch, we got to watch one of these movies. Want to watch one of them? He goes, I'll watch any David Fincher film. I love David Fincher, except Seven. It's so good, I never want to watch it again. I'm still disturbed from watching it the first time. But it sticks with you because it's unsettling. It touches on something unnerving, so dehumanizing, while touching on things that are kind of so relatable at the same time. Even the theological implications of using the 7 deadly sins as a way to kill 7 victims, and how they touch on things so close and personal, whether eating, gluttony, sexual desire, arrogance, like all of these things, it touches on them in a way that makes it feel personal. Even just the dialogue about their perspective on the world, bringing a child into this world, it sits with you after you've seen the film. And it's a movie that ends on such a shocking note that sticks with you. It's memeable, it's quotable, while being just horribly shocking.
Put the gun down. I saw you with the box. What was in the box?
And it's a movie that's almost 30 years old, and it hasn't aged at all besides Brad Pitt's hair choices, which distinctly lock him into the mid-90s. Everything else about the film, it could be released now and it would still hold up because it's such a good film that does everything right. But coming in at number 1, The Social Network. And part of what makes this film so fascinating is that it is sort of telling the real life story of where Facebook came from, this website that is kind of the face of social media, something that has transformed society over the last 20 years. And you're kind of seeing how it emerged. And someone like Mark Zuckerberg, who is such a prominent staple of society over the last 20 years, this movie came out 13 years ago. He's not even 40 yet. There's a movie made about him before. He was like 5 years away from turning 30 when they made this movie about him. And some of that is just so utterly fascinating. This person that is Mark Zucker and the rise of Facebook. And David Fincher, with an Aaron Sorkin script, are able to tell this story that's about coding and court depositions into this funny and fascinating tale filled with just these lively characters that are probably a lot more interesting than their real life counterparts. You've got weirdo Armie Hammer, who is so good at playing these 2 twins that when I first watched the movie, I thought that he actually was twins. Like, the technology as well as the performances are so seamless, you really buy into the fact that there's 2 of this guy because it feels that way. They're able to have this compelling narrative about world-changing social media, but it's also a character study. Like, it has all the big plot story stuff, but it also is very personal about this person who just so desperately wants to connect with people and be accepted, but he's so bad at it and chooses methods that are just so self-destructive that he pushes everyone away. Anyone that's ever cared about him, anyone that he's actually wanted their approval, he pushes them away, while in this other sense being wildly successful at his goals. And it just seamlessly kind of has a compelling narrative with a fascinating character study right at the same time, while being consistently entertaining and deep and thoughtful throughout. And so for me, this is the Fincher film that, in a filmography of great movies, there's a lot of movies that, like, half of his movies could be number one, and I'd be like, that's fair. That's fair. I'm not going to argue with you. I get it. Different day of the week, I could put that one at number one. For me, my personal tastes, what did I kind of personally get out of it on an ongoing level at this phase of my life in particular? Social Network comes in at number one. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, you can check out my other director rankings right over here. I got Spielberg, Nolan, Scorsese, M. Night Shyamalan, and so many more. Likewise, I've done several different kind of deeper dives into some of these movies. Zodiac, Seven, The Social Network. You can check those out in that playlist right over there. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much.